human nature shrinks in horror from the deeds that have been done in Paris. The crimes of the insurgents have surpassed the most gloomy forebodings of what would be accomplished under the red flag. The burning of Paris was diabolical, the shooting of hostages a deed without name. But it seems as if we were destined to forget the work of these maddened savages in the spectacle of the vengeance wreaked upon them. The wholesale executions inflicted by the Versailles soldiery, the triumph, the glee, the ribaldry of the party of order sicken the soul. That was from the London Times on the 29th of May, 1871, and what they are reporting on is the brief life and the bloody end of the Paris Commune of 1871. I'm David Olusoga, and welcome to Journey Through Time.
And I'm Sarah Churchwell, and this is the first of 4 episodes where we're going to be telling the story of the Paris Commune and the siege of Paris that led up to it. It's the story of how, in the chaos after France's defeat by Prussia, the city of Paris, the capital city of France, rose up against its own government and for a few extraordinary weeks tried to rule itself. So let's set the scene. It's spring 1871. France is a nation in crisis, and its capital city decides to take a stand. At this point, Paris breaks from the national government, and for 72 defiant days, the city tries to govern itself. And it's a really interesting moment because the city is acting as an actor on the political stage, and it's also the setting for this story. So it is the stage.
And the character.
And the character, right, at the same time. And it's claiming to speak for the people of Paris, but really the people of France, against a government that is increasingly seen as cowardly, arguably corrupt, and just increasingly illegitimate. They just say it doesn't speak for them. And they call this experiment the Paris Commune. It's become, really legendary, and it's an amazing story that we're really looking forward to telling, because what happens is that Paris turns into a fortress basically overnight, and they expel the government's troops. The red socialist flags are flying over Paris. And of course, it being Paris, there are barricades rising through the boulevards.
And it's a story that's going to rumble on through the 20th century. It becomes a model for later revolutionaries, but it also comes out of a preceding French tradition of revolution that power could be seized from the streets.
Yeah. And those barricades, it was sort of being tongue-in-cheek there, but there's a reason why there are these iconic barricades because of that revolutionary past. That very much comes into the story because, as you say, this is the continuation, a real sense of a kind of unfinished revolution that comes through this sense that the French radicals have in this moment, that the work of the French Revolution in the 18th century was never finished.
Yeah, all revolutions are unfinished. There's always people who would want to push them further.
Yeah. And so this sense that the elites and the bourgeoisie are selling out the people, and that the government keeps doing that. And now they have this chance to finish the work. And so what happens in the Paris Commune is that a kind of coalition emerges, but it's a really unusual and interesting coalition of the people. It's soldiers and students, which is not necessarily, who we think of working together, and women and workers and teachers and artists. And they all join in trying to create something new. But they're in the middle of a siege. And so they're also trying to improvise a government in the middle of a siege, a situation which is not necessarily the best conditions for producing a new government, which the canny listener will realize maybe has something to do with it only lasting 72 days. So really, it is kind of think Les Miserables, right? This is the Song of Angry Men. It's barricades and idealism and street fighting and betrayal and bloodshed. And as you're saying, the Paris Commune actually comes after Victor Hugo's iconic story, which is about some of those earlier revolutions from the 1830s, 1848, but it features the same spirit.
And it is a moment of really extraordinary violence. I think we all can picture Paris in the revolution. We know about the idea of the terror. I think this idea that the French Revolution ends in violence is quite familiar, and the guillotine. But this is quite incredibly violent, what happens in Paris in 1870, 1871, and much less well known.
Yeah, and it's much more violent. So more Parisians died at the end of the Paris Commune than during the entire reign of terror. So exactly as you say, we're all familiar with that idea of the terror ending the French Revolution. But the battles that end the Paris Commune, they're the bloodiest urban battles of the modern age in Western Europe, and fought in a city that, of course, saw itself as the pinnacle of civilization.
Yeah. And it's important to say, and I'll keep coming back to this because I love the Paris that is created which is new at this point. This is the Paris we know. I mean, the Paris of the Revolution is a medieval city that looks very different. This is the same beautiful boulevard Paris that we are familiar with today at war. It is a battlefield in those beautiful boulevards with people looking down from those balconies. It's also an age of photography. We can see this.
Yeah. And crucially, I mean, we are used to some of those images of those beautiful boulevards, with tanks going down them, but that's when they're being invaded by a foreign enemy. But this is Paris at war with itself.
Yeah.
This is civil war.
Yeah, and there are people who call it a civil war.
Yeah.
Marx famously later calls it a civil war.
Yeah, and with good reason, right? What happens when governments treat their own citizens as enemies? And the answer is it ends very badly indeed.
Before we get to 1871, traditionally, 1870 comes first, and that's another big historical year in Europe and a critical year for France.
Yeah, the Commune actually begins with a catastrophe. It begins with France's total humiliation at the hands of Prussia. So going back a little bit, we need to really start with the late 1860s to get us to 1870. So this is what history always does, right? Is we just keep rewinding. Well, to understand that, you have to look at the year before and the year before that and the year before that. But we'll start with the late 1860s so we don't rewind all the way back to the French Revolution. And in the late 1860s, Europe's balance of power is shifting. And that's largely thanks to one man, Otto von Bismarck, who is, of course, the Prussian statesman who basically invents modern Germany.
Yeah, he is the Machiavelli of the 19th century. He is a statesman of such incredible cunning and planning and foresight that he basically invents modern Germany and drags these various principalities and states together. But to do that, he needs a series of wars. And he uses the wars very opportunistically. He creates wars in order to foment that sense of pan-German nationalism that will bring these different German states wanting to unify. So he needs this sense of nationalism. We should say this is to unify under Prussian leadership. This is not to unify as some sort of lovely hippie confederation. This is for the German states to fall in line and be led by Prussia, with Berlin as the capital of this new German empire.
It's not the Berlin Commune that he's that he's after. Exactly. And of course, it's Bismarck who gives us the famous phrase realpolitik, and that is the Machiavellian politics that you're talking about, right?
This is the age of blood and iron.
Yeah. And so it's one quick, carefully planned war after another, stoking the energy that he wants to unify Germany. At the same time, France is led by Napoleon III, who is the nephew of Bonaparte, and he's leading what is now the French Second Empire.
Because of Napoleon III, historians often call Napoleon Bonaparte the Great Napoleon to distinguish between the two.
And the minor Napoleon.
Well, I mean, there is quite a difference.
The lesser Napoleon. Now, Napoleon III sees German unification as both a threat, rightly so, of course, but also as an insult to French pride, which is still wounded from Waterloo 50 years ago, but they're still cross.
Where the Prussian army had arrived on the battlefield towards the end of the day. I mean, France was already losing by that point, but this is the final guarantee of defeat at Waterloo, is the arrival of the Prussian army under General Blucher, and it is seen as a war, a battle of an alliance between the British, the old enemy, and the Prussians, the new enemy. So there's bitterness. There's also bitterness in Germany, where the German states had been invaded by the French armies, and the French armies had in some places run amok. I mean, most of those battles that take place during the Napoleonic Wars aren't in France.
Yeah. Now, meanwhile, Bismarck has already beaten Denmark in 1864. He's beaten Austria in 1866. And so he's piling up these wins. And he knows he needs one more win to stoke that German nationalism. And he's looking for opportunities, basically. And then in the summer of 1870, he sees the opportunity that he's been looking for. A German prince gets lined up to inherit the Spanish throne, a Hohenzollern. And France is furious, right? So we can't have any more Germans taking power in Europe. And Bismarck sees the opening.
This is like back to the 17th century when the worries about Spanish succession are causing wars in Europe. I mean, it does seem to belong to another age, the idea of heads of state and kings and queens coming to the throne and causing tensions in Europe. But it is still happening. Yeah,
it does feel like a throwback, right? But
but this is still an age of empires and kings and monarchs and emperors. I mean, this is it's close to the modern era, but Europe is still very much a continent in which there is incredible power on royal heads.
Yeah. And that's very much the story of the Paris Commune, right? This is very much about Parisians pushing back against the power of the monarchy. It's called the Second Empire for a reason. Napoleon has asserted that he is an imperial monarchical force.
Yeah.
So Bismarck sees the opening here, the tensions are rising, and he edits a royal telegram. He basically falsifies it. So it's misinformation. It's the now infamous Ems dispatch to make it sound like the Prussian king has publicly insulted the French ambassador. So he's deliberately goading France to respond. He's picking a war with France. And it works. The doctored message hits Paris like a grenade. There's absolute outrage, crowds in the streets, the press demanding revenge. We cannot let this stand. We've been insulted on the international stage. And Napoleon III, who's desperate to gain some of his uncle's glory, takes the bait.
This reminds me of our episodes on the tensions between Britain and America during the American Civil War, where Britain and America almost went to war on exactly this issue, the issue not of anything of geopolitical or geostrategic importance, but the idea of national honor. And this is a moment when Bismarck has created a scenario that it looks like French national honor has been insulted. It's such a big, powerful motivating force in the 19th century, the idea of national insult, national honor.
And it's only 10 years after that story that we were telling, right? So it's the same moment. So Napoleon III bites. And of course, the first law of realpolitik is don't take the bait from Bismarck.
Always presume Bismarck has an ulterior motive. It would be like the iron law of diplomacy in the late 19th century.
Just don't trust Bismarck. He's got a plan and you're a pawn in his plan. So, but Napoleon III has not learned that lesson. So on July 19th, 1870, France declares war on Prussia, exactly as Bismarck has planned and wants. And of course, it's an utter catastrophe. Bismarck doesn't pick a war with somebody he's going to lose to.
Well, the Germans have been modernizing their army. They have a new high-tech rifle, as do the French, the Dreiser rifle. And they've been working with the great industrial firms of the Ruhr, like Krupp's, and they have incredibly modern artillery. So this is an army that kind of slightly under the radar, the way that hasn't really been properly noticed in Paris or in London, that this is about the most efficient army in the world at this moment. But the French are very confident in their military ability.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say exactly. So France thinks that it's absolutely can just march out and take on the Prussians and show them who's in charge.
Well, they just introduced, I'm still going to go on about guns, but I'm about to go and do a tour of the history of firearms. But they've introduced a new rifle called the Churchwell, which so far had proved incredibly effective. So they think they've got a war-winning weapon as well. So everybody, it is an age where the French really think their military, not just because of its traditions and its successes under Napoleon, but because of the modernization that they've been engaged in, that their army is the best in the world.
One of their problems is that they don't have anybody who is as strategic as Bismarck. So their weapons are okay, but their planning is not.
Yeah, they're trying to recreate the Napoleonic Wars without a real Napoleon. They have an ersatz Napoleon.
And that's an ersatz Napoleon against an actual Bismarck is not a fair fight. So France just collapses almost instantly. I mean, basically it's fallen for its own PR, smoking its own dope, and it just is routed within weeks.
And it's very similar to the summer of 1940. It's just in so many ways. It looks like what happens when the Panzers burst through the Ardennes in 1940. But this is 1870.
And Napoleon III is himself captured at the head of his army in Sedan in early September, along with 100,000 French soldiers who are dead or captured. So within weeks, the empire is just in ruins.
If you lose your emperor, your empire is over. So this is the moment that the Second Empire that had ruled France since 1841, is that right? I can never remember my republics and my empires.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many of them. It ends with the capture.
Yeah, it collapses.
Napoleon III.
And the news hits Paris the next day. Fury, of course, in the streets. And that government collapses overnight.
Fury at the defeat as well as fury at the enemy.
Yeah. And it's important to say that although the empire has fallen, the government has fallen, France has not yet surrendered to Prussia. And that's a really important part of how the next part of the story plays out. So France is still at a state of war with Prussia, but they've lost their leader, and the government collapses inside France. So on September 4th, 1870, the Third Republic is declared in Paris, so a republican government that's replacing the monarchy.
The Third Republic is going to rule France all the way up until the next catastrophic defeat that we've just mentioned, the Fall of France in 1940. So this is a big chunk of French history, which begins in this most inauspicious of moments and ends in a similar moment.
But for the anti-monarchists, this is a very exciting opportunity. Although there's all of this horror and anger, this is also what they've been waiting for, is the chance to try Republican government again. The Republican government that is established is given the extremely inaccurate name, the Government of National Defense. And it forms as the Prussians are marching on Paris. Now, this is very much a bourgeois government. It's the same leaders that Paris is accustomed to. But within Paris, the groups on the farther left, the radical groups, see that this new government is actually extremely weak. It literally doesn't have enough troops. I mean, we've just had 100,000 captured. So they begin protesting against that government within days. They see their opportunity. Everybody in this story is seeing their opportunities to pursue their political agendas. And so they launch protests against it within days. It hasn't had a chance to do anything yet, demanding the formation of a commune, a revolutionary commune. They want workers' rights, and they don't want the same business as usual with the bourgeoisie in charge.
And this is the moment when the interests of Paris and its population are beginning to sort of bifurcate, because this is a national government in Paris, but this is a rejection of it by Parisians, that we want something different.
Well, and part of that rejection is also based on the fact that very quickly the government starts to signal that it doesn't believe it can win against the Prussians. But the Parisians are determined to fight on. And so that gap in particular really widens the gulf between them, because the Parisians don't want to surrender, and yet they're looking at a government that seems ready to capitulate. So although not everyone in Paris agrees with the radicals by any stretch, what all of Paris does agree on is that they're determined not to yield to the Prussians, and Prussians are marching on them. So all of Paris is shouting in defiance, and you can just hear the Marseillaise being sung on the street, can't you? I was thinking, if we were Tom and Dom here, we'd burst into song. Thankfully, we're not.
It is the greatest of the national anthems.
I mean, without question.
I'm sorry to not stand up for our God Save the Queen, but it is just an absolute banger.
It is a banger. Anthem. It absolutely is. Allons enfants de la patrie. Here we go. And I think we need to hear that anthem in the background of this whole story.
It's just incredible.
It just really is. I think all of us can agree on that. But before we launch into La Marseillaise, before the barricades go up and the red flags fly, we have a somewhat large cast of characters, which shouldn't surprise anyone, in that description that I gave of the students and the soldiers and the workers and the artists. So there's a lot of people who are going to come together in this commune, and we need to understand a few of the players to follow what happens. So as we've said, Paris is still very much full of bourgeois families and urban elites. They very much like the status quo. And they are invested in that sense of national pride that you're talking about, but they also want stability restored. And then there are the radicals. Now, they also want national honor, but they want change. And they see this, as I said, as an opportunity for that. And at this point, there are some old white men with gray beards who step into the spotlight. They have all kinds of kind of great nicknames. They're known as the old irreconcilables. They are Republicans and radicals who've spent basically the last 20, 30 years refusing to make peace with the empire, with Napoleon III's empire.
It was really unpopular. I mean, this was a middle-class government. This is a deeply class-divided society, and a bit like there's East End and West End of London, Paris is also very geographically divided, with working-class areas, certain arrondissements being working class and others being very posh and bourgeois.
And again, that has a real effect on the way that the story plays out, as we'll see. So these men are the veterans of those uprisings of 1830s and the 1840s, particularly 1848, when revolutions lit up all of Europe, and Paris tried again to make liberty and equality a reality.
Yeah, because by the 1870s, you've got people who basically every kind of 20 years, there's been a revolution. I mean, they've got form.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got history.
They're the old leaders, and they keep getting imprisoned for them. So some of these men are literally present in the uprisings that Victor Hugo turns into Les Miserables. So the novel is from 1862. He's talking about the failed uprising of 1832, but there's 1830, 1848. And it's all sort of, as you say, it's kind of the same genealogy of uprisings as they keep trying again. And these are literally the same men. So they have, for decades, they've been resisting, they've been agitating, they get thrown in jail, they get released, and then they're at it again. And now they're old men, but they're still fighting. Now, it's important to say
they're professional revolutionaries, basically.
Absolutely.
When the opportunity comes every 20 years or so, you get your sort of red sash out from the attic.
That's right. And then march again. Yeah. But it's important to say that their grievances are real. As you said, this is a very divided city. Paris's poor continue to live in overcrowded slums. Prices are rising faster than wages. There are children in factory labor. They haven't had any kind of modern reform yet. And they all have almost no rights to organize, publish, or protest. It was an authoritarian government. And a really key thing also for how the story plays out is that despite being the capital city and the nation's financial heart, Paris actually, at this point in time, has less political autonomy than many rural towns.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. I mean, Paris has never been trusted. Paris's revolution start. Yeah, so the authorities are not wrong in thinking we don't want to give this city, of all the cities in France, its own sense of government, its own independence, because these guys know how to build barricades. Mm. These guys are, it is a hotbed of revolution. So it does create that bizarre effect where the capital city has the least autonomy. In a deeply centralized country, Paris has got the least power of any city.
Yeah. And it's ruled directly by a prefect that's appointed by the state until the Commune. So there's a handful of old revolutionaries who are still shaping Parisian politics. And of course, they're vying with each other as well. They are not a united left, which should not surprise anyone who's familiar with the politics of the left. So basically, although of course there are all kinds of leftist factions, there are two main ones that emerge in the Commune who we need to be aware of. There are the Jacobins, who are led by a man called Charles Delescluze, and they are the heirs to the radical republicanism, as their name suggests, of the French Revolution. This is Robespierre's politics. They think Robespierre didn't finish the job and we're going to do it.
And these neo-Jacobins, I mean, they are constantly slightly cosplaying the French Revolution. They're constantly back-referencing to those figures like Robespierre and Danton. They're, for them, it ain't over. And they're slightly back in the late 18th century.
Yeah. And so they are led by a man who that describes perfectly. Delescluze is austere. He's incorruptible. He's taken part in these earlier uprisings. He's 61 as the story of the Commune kicks off, considered a very old man, which is a little depressing. But he has also spent years on Devil's Island, which will age you. And in fact, he's dying of consumption.
And Devil's Island is the penal colony in French Guiana where Dreyfus had been. We're slipping into another very complicated story there. But it is an infamous place. It's like sort of Rikers Island or what's the one in
Alcatraz.
Alcatraz, that's the one. So it's
more
topical than usual, Alcatraz, isn't it? Yeah.
Indeed. We can tell that story too. So he's been weakened by that. He's been aged by it. He's dying as this story unfolds. But he is unbending and he's fanatically committed to the cause. And then there are the Blanquists, led by Auguste Blanqui.
It was the ultimate professional revolution.
Yeah, he's a legend.
Yeah, he's either on the barricades or in prison for being on the barricades.
Yeah, and then as soon as they let him out, he's back on the barricades. He's gaunt, he's white-haired, he's ascetic. He's like this political apostle. They'll follow him anywhere. And they're completely devoted to him. He has this amazing array of nicknames. They call him the Old One. They call him the Spider of Revolution. And they call him L'Enfermé, which just means the prisoner, the imprisoned one, because he's been arrested so many times.
And his followers are fascinating in that they operate in cells. I mean, they are a bit like spies in the Cold War. They'll know their leader and the other few people in their cell, but they don't know who the other cells are.
Yeah.
It is incredibly sophisticated. And I mean, paranoid is not the word because they've got a lot to be worried about. The authorities really want to crush them. But this is they are really committed agitators.
Yeah, these are not communal politics. His politics are much more the politics of coup d'etat. And so he wants all of that secrecy and he's kind of conspiratorial. There's a great description of him by the writer Alexis de Tocqueville, who said that Blanqui looked like a moldering corpse who just crawled out of a sewer, which is memorable. I'm really fond of that, the moldering corpse. But Marx called him the greatest revolutionary of the century.
Yeah. And Marx, we should say, because he comes up a couple of times, is in London. Engels is in Manchester, but they are they're going to watch these events very carefully. They
are, and we'll come back to Marx and his view of how it unfolds in Paris in the next episode. But around these old guard, then there are young radicals gathering. So there are labor organizers like Eugène Varlin and the poet Paul Verlaine, who is incredibly famous mostly for his affair with Arthur Rimbaud. And what a lot of people don't realize is, which is only a couple of years later, but that he was part of the Paris Commune. And he was, in fact, he's about to run the Commune's press bureau. So we have some very well-known figures who are caught up in the story of the Commune, as we'll see. And then there's a new avant-garde that joins the Paris Commune, which are the women of Paris. teachers, writers, factory workers, and they're all done waiting for liberty to be given to them by men. In fact, during the siege, there are calls for women to form armed battalions to defend the city themselves. And they have a great name. It's actually a man who proposes this. And he says they should be called the Amazons of the Seine, which I really like. And 1,500 women sign up to be Amazons of the Seine to form these armed battalions. And they're by no means all working class. Bourgeoisie are signing up too. But the government quashes the idea, I'm afraid. So this is basically our cast of characters. These are the people who are going to come together and form the Paris Commune. But first, we have to get them through the siege, because it is the siege that is going to lead to this outcome.
And all of these characters and all of these tensions are kind of concentrated in Paris, which was at that point a walled city with its own defenses, with a German army heading towards it. So let's discover how it all explodes after a break. Welcome back. It is 8th of September, 1870. We're in Paris on the eve of the formation of the Paris Commune.
So it's 4 days after the Third Republic has been proclaimed. The government is just being built. And on this day, September 8th, two socialist feminists, women named Louise Michel and André Leo, lead a march on the Hôtel de Ville, so the town hall, the mayoralty. And they're demanding that women be given arms to help defend the city. The Prussians are on their way. Everybody knows it. And they don't see why women shouldn't be defending their city as well. Now, they're both really interesting women, and we're going to be following them through the story. André Leo is one of the sharpest minds in 19th century socialism. She's very undeservedly forgotten. She's really, really interesting. That's a pen name, André Leo. She took the name from her twin sons, André and Leo. And she wrote essays arguing that class struggle and women's emancipation were the same fight. She actually said that every revolution that excludes women is doomed before it starts, because it's thrown away half of its army. And of course, that was very much not the view of Karl Marx and the First International, which was not interested in including women. And André Leo is fighting, saying, of course, you've got to have women if you want to have a revolution. She co-founds the socialist paper La Sociale with another socialist woman named Anna Jacquard, another really interesting woman. And they work at turning their ideas into organization and actually making stuff happen. And when the Prussians start closing in, Leo and Jacquard and women like them start putting all of these ideas into action. They set up clubs, they rally women, they say it's time to fight for the capital and it's time to fight for their own rights. And these are all going to happen at the same time.
And the Germans are beginning to encircle the city at this point. Paris has about 38 miles, I think, of defensive walls. And the Prussians are going to create a 50-mile circumference circle around the city. And that's beginning to happen as these figures are emerging.
And they are, we can think about the Prussians, really tightening a noose.
So who is the second of these figures?
The second is Louise Michel. She's a school teacher. She's going to become absolutely legendary as the Red Virgin of Montmartre, La Vierge Rouge. It's one of the best revolutionary nicknames ever, an absolute classic, the Red Virgin. Now, it's meant to be a slur from some people, but of course she wears it as a badge of honor. She dressed in men's clothes. She dressed as a guardsman, wearing, a uniform. She gave these, fiery speeches at workers' meetings. She's calling for armed resistance months before anybody else has even managed the commune. I mean, she's incredibly militant, and she's out there saying, we need to fight. And so as the Prussians are closing in, she and André Leo head for City Hall, a school teacher and a journalist leading a march of Parisian women demanding that they be able to fight for the Republic too. It's totally cinematic, right? You can just picture it.
And City Hall is going to play a very important role in this story.
Over and over again, we're going to come back to the Hôtel de Ville.
Which is it's slightly odd because it is the City Hall, but its name is Hôtel de Ville.
Yeah. We were saying at the beginning of the story that Paris is both the stage and an actor, and the Hôtel de Ville is almost the same thing. It comes back again and again, and it's sort of taking this presence in the story. So these two women march up the steps of the Hôtel de Ville, and they're brandishing weapons, and they've got a crowd roaring in front of them. For me also, though, it's the first sign that this crisis that's brewing here for Paris is not only a military crisis. This is a political and social crisis. It's
not just about defense of the city.
This is a new order that is fighting to be born. Now, Bismarck has reckoned that Paris is going to go down quickly. The French army went down quickly and Napoleon went down quickly. So he thinks Paris will also surrender a few days, maybe a week, and they'll just give up.
I mean, national stereotypes play a role here because they think of the French as decadent, and they imagine that without food, with the restaurants closed with no fun and entertainment, that these Gauls will surrender, and they're not as tough as the Teutons. And there is quite a lot of national stereotype playing in Bismarck's calculations here. It is a moment when the sort of wily fox, the kind of Machiavelli of the 19th century, starts kind of falling into kind of quite lazy stereotypical thinking.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. And it's really interesting. I think that whatever we think about the politics and the ultimate fate of the Commune, as we're about to see, the strength of character that Parisians show through this story is really extraordinary.
Yeah.
There's just a level of character here that you can't help but admire. Bismarck has underestimated something else that you wouldn't expect him to underestimate, because this is a logistical question, but he has underestimated the degree to which Paris is a fortress. As you mentioned, David, since the 1840s, it's been ringed with, it's got moats, it's got ramparts, it's got heavy guns everywhere. Of course, it's got very strategic hills. It's got all of these strategic advantages, enough to put the fear of God into an enemy. And Bismarck just sort of blithely marches on it.
I think we sometimes forget that the late 19th, or sort of second half of the 19th century into the 20th century, up to the First World War, is an age when Europe is fortifying itself. There are going to be fortresses built by multiple generations, and Paris is making itself, in the view of French politicians, an unconquerable city. This is the idea. The city expands. Vast amounts of money, vast amounts of energy are put into creating these huge ramparts. I think it's right, 38 miles circumference around the city. So slightly like going back to the medieval age, building cities with city gates again.
Yeah, they design it to be unconquerable, and it almost is. Inside the city walls are about 300,000 defenders as well. They've got local soldiers. They call them National Guardsmen, which is a little bit confusing.
Like a militia.
But they're 300,000, so it's pretty strong. But they're about half trained, and they're short on weapons. So that's a real problem. And then there are also the national government's regular forces in the city as well. So they are in a position to defend themselves. And although Napoleon has been defeated, France has not surrendered. Now, Bismarck, who's nothing if not patient, and as we said, is, a strategist, he decides he doesn't need to waste shells, because the thing about a fortress is it can keep people out, but you can also keep people in, and you can make sure that supplies don't come in and out. So he doesn't have to waste shells. He can starve them out instead. So he waits. He also knows that the weather's on his side. Winter is coming. All of this is going to help him. But Paris does not give in. Paris digs in. They're defiant. They're resourceful. Irritatingly uncooperative. We're not doing a lot of national stereotyping here, but it does feel French to me that they are just bloody-minded and going, nope, we're not going to do it. You can't make us. Now, Paris officials are, of course, doing the math. They reckon they've got food and fuel for about 80 days. And it's a city of just under 2 million people. But they miscalculate in a few really important ways. For example, they forget that cows may be needed for meat, and they are needed for milk for children, and you can't have both.
Well, they delay bread rationing until October, I think, really late.
Yeah. And so there are a few errors of judgment like that, and it means that the food starts to run out faster. Rationing starts late, but sooner than people think it will. And meanwhile, the government of national defense is, of course, not just the government of Paris. It is the government of the whole country. And so they can't be completely trapped in a besieged Paris and also be governing the nation. And so a large government delegation gets out of Paris and it relocates. And actually what's going to happen to this government delegation is it keeps moving from provincial city to provincial city. And through late September and early October, as the siege is closing in, the demonstrations on the left continue. So they're still demanding arms, and they're still demanding a local elected government. They want the chance to decide their own fate. And meanwhile, food is running out.
And this is going to be a very bad winter. It's one of the worst winters of the 19th century.
The weather becomes terrible, and so they also are going to run short on fuel very quickly. And of course, all of that just makes the conditions of starvation worse, and it's going to get very bad indeed. The government is realizing that they can't stay trapped in Paris. And on the 7th of October, one of the most kind of iconic and memorable moments of the siege of Paris occurs, which is when Léon Gambetta, who is the Minister of War and the Interior, goes up the steep hill of Montmartre and he climbs into a hot air balloon. And the Prussian troops are all ringing the city, as we've said, below him. And he gets into a hot air balloon and he floats up and over the Prussian forces to get out of Paris. In fact, and this will interest you with your interest in guns, David, you may or may not have known this, but they fire what are among the first anti-aircraft shots in history trying to bring Gambetta down.
But he gets away.
But it's
not a good look.
No. So he's clipped by gunfire, but he keeps floating and he's just sort of drifting calmly over enemy lines. Now, it is a good look and it isn't a good look, right? So on the one hand, it's heroic, it's fabulous. The rest of France loves it because he's going to rally resistance from the provinces. And so some Parisians see it that way. They realize that he's getting out to help. But yes, you've also just watched a government minister literally float off and leave you to starve. He's just fucked off and left you there, So it's safe to say, I think, that feelings were mixed on the ground. Yeah. So as the siege closes in, frustration is growing. The National Guard is there, but they're barely being used. You've got 300,000 soldiers and they're not being used to fight back against the Prussians. Mostly they're just drunk on the streets because food may be scarce, but cheap wine, it's Paris, was not scarce.
Because the cellars are there. I mean, this is where 1870 is very, very like 1789, is that after the revolution, famously, the cellars of the houses of the aristocrats were raided. There's a lot of wine because wine is stockpiled.
Yeah. And so the National Guard is just drunk all the time. So people are furious about that. Some of them blame the Guard themselves. Others blame the government. And anger is really spreading across the left. At the same time, all over the city, there are rumors that the government is getting ready to capitulate. Now, Paris, as we're saying, is literally starving for the nation. It is starving to hold off the Prussians. So imagine, you're there, you're not eating, but you're absolutely taking this last stand. And then you hear that your government is prepared to throw in the towel, that they're going to give up on you. It feels like treason. And by late October, there's this gathering sense that that's what's going to happen. And much of the city is turning on the new government. It's less than 2 months old, but they feel that this government just doesn't represent them. And then on October 28th, news of another French defeat reaches Paris. 3 days later, thousands of people protest at City Hall, accusing the government of plotting surrender, and they demand a stronger defense. Now, that uprising on October 31st is really serious. It's violent. This is not a peaceful protest. It is a militant protest. But the troops restore order fairly quickly, and the revolt collapses within hours. The new government placates the left. It makes them a bunch of promises, and then it proceeds to break them instantly. So it double crosses them immediately. And Paris increasingly feels that it's now fighting on two fronts. It's fighting the Prussians, but it's also fighting its own government because it sees that government as cowardly and it sees it as illegitimate. It sees it as I've said, as not representing their interests.
A government that is willing to surrender, to draw a line under the war while they're suffering and still fighting that war.
Yeah. And they're suffering on behalf of the nation. And the government is saying that, or the rumor is that the government is getting ready to concede. So through a long, very hungry winter, this rage just starts to ferment.
And it's this sense of injustice, this sense of a government outside of Paris not sharing the burden, a government that is on the verge of making peace with Bismarck and the Prussians, that leads to situations in Paris that out of which the Commune, the famous Paris Commune, will be born. That story of how the Commune comes into existence is what we will be discovering next time.
And join us then.
Thank you for listening.